Welcome to this course in the specialization of personal essay and memoir. My name is Saeed Serafizadeh. I'm a memoirist, personal essayist, and I also write short stories. So you're going to say this is really weird, but we're going to begin talking about all of this by talking about fiction. Why? First of all, what's the point of nonfiction? We're writing about ourselves. We're writing about things that have happened to us. This is another way of saying maybe we're a little bit narcissistic, that we have things that we've experienced that we think, oh my God, they are so interesting that I can't wait to share them with the world. So one of the things we've got to figure out first off is what makes for an interesting story. Because does anything just make for an interesting story? Or do you have to pick and choose what you're going to talk about? So whether you're going to talk about, say, I lost my dog, or my dad forgot to pick me up for the softball game, or something maybe extremely traumatic like I was in a car accident. All of these things we've got to decide, are they worthy of a story and how do we tell them? And is there anything we can learn from the folks who do fiction in order to better get our stories across? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do something before we go any further, which is I want you to write your earliest memory, whatever it was. If you remember something at the age of 4, then write that down. And if it wasn't until you were 10, write that down, or 15, who knows. So take some time, and I want you to write out your earliest memory. Maybe you only write a few lines. Maybe you write 1 page. All right, welcome back. I'd love to know what you came up with. Here's an idea. Post them in the forums so we can all take a look. Your peers can see what you've written. And listen, it doesn't have to be a big thing that you did. I mean, again, maybe it's, I don't know, you went to school and you were wearing a strange color of shoes and people made fun of you. That's something that could make for a great piece. So actually, let me ask you something. Let's say, theoretically, that your earliest memory is the time you went to school and you were wearing funny colored shoes and your classmates made fun of you. The question is, who is the most important person in that story? Who's the most important character? So is it going to be the classmates? Is it going to be the teacher? Is it going to be the friend that jumped in and rescued you? Or the friend that didn't jump in and rescue you? Okay, here's another question. Let's say your earliest memory was a time you got lost on the street. Look at that. Who's the most important character in that story? Is it the police officer who found you? Is it the nice neighbor who took you in? Is it mom who came and rescued you? I really want you to think about this because I hate to say it, but it's a trick question. And I think I know what you're going to say the answer is. And is the answer the most important person in the story myself? Because again, we're writing about ourselves. And so here we are. We think our lives are super important. And so the answer to who the most important person, the most important character in the story is the reader. That's the answer. Here's the journal. Here's the journal that we've kept of all of our private thoughts, feelings, experiences. What we're going to do is we're going to transition from this to this. This is when we write for ourselves. This is when we're writing for somebody else. This is when it becomes creative writing. We're actually now writing for an audience who doesn't know us, might not even care about us, unfortunately. This is my memoir. It's called When Skateboards Will Be Free. And it's about me growing up in the Socialist Workers' Party in the United States, which was a fringe communist organization that both my mother and father were members of. And we believed that the United States was going to be destined to be engulfed in a working class revolution. And the title, When Skateboards Will Be Free, comes from an experience in my childhood when my mother took me to buy a skateboard. I was about 8 years old, and I said, I want the green one. And she said, well, we can't afford it, but when the revolution comes, you'll have a skateboard because everyone will have a skateboard, because all skateboards will be free. So that's my memoir. But here, listen, this is the point of what we're getting at. We're going from journal to memoir. We're going from private musings to a public presentation. It's actually a performance of sorts. And I want to just demonstrate this in what you might say is a very simplistic way, but I think it's going to get the point across. Here's the opening line of my memoir. My father believes that the United States is destined one day to be engulfed in a socialist revolution. I know the sentence, I know what it means. So how do I render it? I want you to look at the screen and see this. So as you can see what's on screen, it's ungrammatical, there's a lot of typos in it, it's just one sentence. And of course, I know what it means, and it comes from, from my journal, which can be totally sketchy and blah, blah, blah. The handwriting doesn't even need to be clear. And then followed by what was the opening line from my memoir, which I've already read. My father believes the United States is destined one day to be engulfed in a socialist revolution. So you can see that on the one hand, one is just, for me, maybe it'll never see the light of day. And then the next version is for me trying to communicate something to someone who doesn't know me. And I get it that this is a basic concept. We're just talking punctuation, grammar, typos. Who cares really? But keep that principle in mind, that we're looking to communicate something, that we're aware of the reader, that we're aware of the audience. And speaking of audience, I'm talking to you right now. So I need to speak at a certain volume. If I spoke like this, you wouldn't hear me. I'm aware of the audience. If I moved out of the frame, you wouldn't see me. I'm here talking to you. If you've seen a play, you know that actors, when they speak, they don't speak like this. And if they're talking to someone, they don't talk to them like this. They do something called 3/4. It's unnatural. It's not really the way humans talk to each other. We would face one another. But they stand here like this because they're aware of the audience. It's about the audience. So the most important character in what we're writing, whether it's about you being lost, whether it's about you having really funny colored shoes that you got made fun of, the most important character when we're talking about creative writing, personal essay, and memoir is the reader. So we're going to talk about giving the reader what they need, not necessarily what they want. And there's a distinction between those two. Before we go any further, I want you to take as much time as you need to number your page from 1 to 50 if you're 50 years old, 1 to 13 if you're 13 years old, 1 to 100 if you're 100 years old. And then for every number, I want you to write down one significant thing that might have happened to you at that particular age. Age 8, age 9, age 10. If there are years where nothing happened, then just leave that blank. So take as much time as you need and write that down. Okay, so you're probably not going to remember things from 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. One of my earliest memories is from 4. So I want you to hang on to these lists. We're going to do something with them later. One of the things I wonder about is everything you wrote down have to do with something that had a conflict in it? And is that what makes for an interesting story? In the same way that you would read a short story about something that was conflictual and you want to see how it's resolved. But we're going to come back to those questions. Again, what does the reader need as opposed to what does the reader want? And there's a distinction between that. And I want you to look at a few things that happen in fiction and nonfiction. And now here are some subjects from actual published stories by established authors, and see if any of the things that you came up with even remotely line up with what was listed here. So number 1, an author writes about having been kidnapped as a little boy. Number 2, an author writes about working on a roofing crew one winter and observing a coworker be swindled out of his Christmas pay. Number 3, an author writes about her summer teaching school. Number 4, an author writes about having struck and killed a young woman with his car when he was in high school. Number 5, an author writes about his mother learning how to ride a bicycle. What do you think? Do these sound even remotely interesting to you? Do they sound like worthy topics to be written about? So let's do this. Let's look at the opening on screen. I disappeared a few years ago. I disappeared and then I came back. It wasn't a big secret. It wasn't one of those beam me up Scotty deals where I was here and then all of a sudden I was there. I didn't get to go to another planet or anything. I was gone for a few days and then I came home and the police wanted to know everything. And this is number 2. At 26, at the embarrassing end of a series of attempts at channeling Kerouac, I was beyond broke, back in my hometown, living in my aunt and uncle's basement. Number 3, I was miserable that summer. I had chosen to remain at my beautiful school in California because I did not want to return to my parents' beautiful house in Maine. Summer housing was located at the college adjacent to mine, so I moved my few things to a building topped by jutting metal bars as if made from an erector set. There were only a few mostly foreign students on the campus that summer, and they had stranger courtyard activities of which I was not a part. 6 days a week I woke at 7 and took a series of buses through Pomona, a city of low rusted out cars, pawn shops, and slow moving faces, all looking somewhere, and arrived at a white mini mall and diamond bar where I taught 3-hour-long classes. Number 4, half my life ago, I killed a girl. And finally, at first he had thought it splendid that his mother should have her own bicycle. He had even pictured the 3 of them riding together down Poplar Avenue, she and he and his brother. But now as he listens to his father's jokes, which his mother can meet only with dogged silence, he begins to waver. Women don't ride bicycles. What if his father is right? If his mother can find no one willing to teach her? If no other housewife in Reunion Park has a bicycle, then perhaps women are indeed not supposed to ride bicycles. So what if I told you that some of these stories were actually fiction? Would you be able to tell the difference between fiction and nonfiction? Now, if you had to choose, would you have chosen the last one, which is written in the third person, meaning it was written he as opposed to I? At first, he had thought it's splendid that his mother should have her own bicycle, as opposed to, if it were memoir, a personal essay, it would be I, right? It would be, at first, I had thought it's splendid that my mother should have her own bicycle. But no, this is actually from J.M. Coetzee's memoir about his childhood in South Africa, Scenes from a Provincial Life. What about this line? Half my life ago, I killed a girl. Can you tell if that's fiction or nonfiction? Well, that's from a memoir by Darren Strauss. So what about this one? I was miserable that summer. That's the opening sentence, opening partial sentence. Well, that's from a short story by Rebecca Curtis called Big Bear, California. And then this, I disappeared a few years ago. That's also from a short story by A.M. Holmes called Looking for Johnny. Now this one's going to be a little tricky. At 26, at the embarrassing end of a series of attempts at channeling Kerouac, I was beyond broke, back in my hometown, living in my aunt and uncle's basement. That's from a personal essay by George Saunders. But it was later published as a short story. And then here's how it was transformed. Take a look at it on the screen. At 26, at the embarrassing end of a series of attempts at channeling Kerouac, I was beyond broke, back in my hometown, living in my aunt and uncle's basement. And that became, in the short story version, I was 26, beyond broke, back in my hometown, living in my aunt's basement. He's excised a few things. He took out Kerouac. He took out uncle. Who's to say why? The point being, again, that there's a very thin line between fiction and nonfiction. Now, don't think I'm asking you to make things up. I'm not asking you to invent spectacular things that happened in your life. I don't want you to writing about that you went to the moon if you didn't go to the moon. But when we're crafting stories about ourselves, we're looking at fiction, and the ability to detect the difference between fiction and nonfiction is very, very slight for the reader. So we're going to talk about how do we pick a subject? How do we know what we're going to write about? Now remember, we're not looking to necessarily replicate real life. We're looking to make a story out of the lives that we've lived. So what does that mean that we're going to choose? Like, here, let me use myself as an example. Let's say I was going to write an essay about doing this video with you. So what do I do to describe it? Now remember that the reader, they don't know anything about me. They're like a newborn baby. So I've got to give them everything. So here I am doing this video. So am I going to describe the room I'm in? Am I going to describe that there's a table right here, right in front of me? Am I going to describe that there's an exit sign right there? Do I talk about the light coming in? Is that important to the thing I'm going to talk about? If I want to talk about this video, what is the, let's say, substance of it? What's the essence of it? Now, what I could do is I could talk about my acting experience, that I used to want to be an actor when I was younger. The question really is, what's the main issue or conflict? If I'm going to talk about, let's say, being self-conscious about how I dress, then I'll describe what I'm wearing. If I'm going to write about, say, a feeling of claustrophobia, then I'll describe that there's an exit sign right there and that the doors are right there, because that will figure into the overall idea of what I'm trying to say. Let me use a real example, is that I used to want to be an actor. You don't know anything about me, so I've got to tell you a little bit about what that acting was like. That I started when I was 8 years old for the first time on stage. I could talk about how the feeling of being paid attention to, maybe I can connect that back to some home life, that I didn't feel like I got enough attention from my parents, so that being on the stage sort of filled in something that I was missing. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the plays that I was in. I could also start talking about how being an actor, there are certain detrimental qualities to it, like it feeds narcissism. You just want people to stare at you. You love the attention. So in talking about this video that I'm making, I've now gone backwards in time, and I've talked a little bit about the history of that. I can talk about that I moved to New York City from Pittsburgh specifically because I wanted to be an actor. I was 24 years old. So I arrive in New York and I'm going, how do I make an acting career? And again, I just want to remind you, all of this is based on the premise that I wanted to write something about doing this video. I wanted to write a personal essay about doing this video, but now I'm looking for something deeper. So now I've gone back. I'm back to now 24 years old. I've moved to New York. I got headshots done. I got resumes. I'm going out on auditions. So all of that is this background, and now I'm going to lead right up to a moment when I was called in to audition for a television commercial, which of course is very lucrative, and I really wanted to do it. And I walk into the audition, and I'm not going to tell you right this second what happens. I'm going to let you wait till the next segment. So as I was saying before, that I walked into this audition for a commercial, and then I stopped. Did you notice something? Well, I hope you wanted to hear what was going to happen next. Now, this is going back to one of those most fundamental fiction storytelling elements, which is called the cliffhanger. Build, 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 get the reader interested, and then cut away to something else. Now remember, we're writing personal essay and memoir, but that doesn't mean that fiction and storytelling, as I've been saying all along, isn't going to play into what we're doing. All of this to say, we're writing a piece. I'm trying to look for deeper, I'm trying to look for substance. I wanted to write about this experience doing this video now. I've gone back to talk about my acting. I've given the background of that. Now I'm talking about this moment when I was, I guess, in my early 20s. I walk into this audition, and I'm in the casting room, and they say to me, "We're so happy to see you, and here's what the audition is going to be. We're going to play a song that at the time was super popular, and it was by Will Smith, and it was called Getting Jiggy With It." And they said, "We're going to play this song, and we'd like you to just dance along to it," which I felt like, okay, I can do that. And they said, "Oh, and it doesn't even have to be good dancing, it can be funny dancing." And I said, "That's fine. And when the chorus comes in, which was Getting Jiggy With It, if you could just sing along to that." And I said, "That's fine." And if you could sing along with an accent, and the accent they wanted me to do was a Middle Eastern accent. So the idea was, here I showed up for this audition, but they had brought me in because of my name, Saeed Serafizadeh, and the idea was now I was going to be a bit of a clown, dancing along to getting jiggy with it, doing this accent. Now, right now, cut away in this moment and let you wonder whether or not I actually did it or not, but I'll let the cat out of the bag and tell you, yes, I danced along and did it. Just to go back, I started by saying I wanted to write about this experience doing this teaching video in this room, and now I've talked about my acting experience, and now I've gotten into something else, which is xenophobia in the United States and my having to deal with being of Middle Eastern descent in the United States. The piece has become deeper. There are more layers to it. Let me just show you, if I was going to put this into prose, how this might work. Let's say this is the opening line. Now, these aren't hugely polished, but here's the idea. I want the opening line to just establish what's going to happen. As you can see, it says, "One afternoon, I found myself on the campus of Wesleyan University staring at a camera, teaching instructional videos on how to write nonfiction. And now I want to bring in some background and context." And here's that paragraph. "I had always wanted to be on stage, beginning when I was at least 7 years old and had performed as Philip in The Beaver Coat by Gerhardt Hauptmann. That I had been cast over other children seemed to indicate that I had some talent, even at that young age, and that I would do well to continue to pursue this." Now, that last line of that first paragraph, I hope, is going to make the reader want to keep reading more. And then here's the following paragraph. "That I had been cast as a character named Philip, however, would be mostly an aberration, when years later, casting directors would not be able to see past my long and curious name and would want to cast me primarily as deli owner, taxi cab driver, or terrorist." So that's the beginning of this personal essay that began with talking about doing this instructional video in this room. Now, I want to end this fictional discussion with something that is a lot easier to do when you're writing fiction, which is to write an unlikable character. So if we're writing about someone invented, the stakes are low. If we're going to show or express unsavory characteristics, the question is, if we're writing about ourselves, what can we reveal about ourselves? How honest are we going to be able to be about our own selves? And I think this is really essential for personal essay and memoir, because it's okay to talk about other people and to have a keen eye about them, but are we going to be able to bring that eye back to ourselves? And James Baldwin, the great American author, said that truth is a double-edged sword, that you're going to cut yourself on it as well. I want to just bring up one thing that I felt helped open up my writing. Now, I've just talked about having experienced xenophobia, but what about my own xenophobia? So in 1990, I'm going to say early 2000s, when the Second Gulf War began and I was living in New York, I got into an altercation with a cab driver from the Middle East. And we had some words. I was on my bicycle and he cut me off and we had some words. And what flitted through my head, but I didn't say aloud, was go back to your own country. And then I decided, I'm going to write a piece about this because I felt like this will be an interesting thing. Here I am, the war has begun against Iraq, and now I had this altercation with a cab driver. And I described that scene and I got right to the moment where the thought flitted through my head, go back to your own country. And I said, I can't possibly reveal that about myself. But there was some part of me that knew that if I'm going to be totally honest about this experience and also about who I am, it was something I needed to reveal. And so I did. And of course, within the context of my own Middle Eastern descent, it made it very complicated that this thought was in my head. But it also opened up a certain element of my writing, which is that It's important to reveal about yourself as much as you reveal about others. So we've just talked about fiction and nonfiction and the overlap, and now we're going to have Amy Bloom, who's going to come in and we're going to talk to her. And she's a great person to talk to because she does fiction and personal essay, and she's written novels, and she's a best-selling author. And so we'll continue this discussion about how the two overlap. Hi, everybody. I'm here with someone who has a slightly easier name to pronounce than mine, Amy Bloom. She's a fiction writer, personal essayist, novelist, short story writer. She's a professor at Wesleyan University. Amy, thanks for being here.
It's nice to be here.
So we're going to talk about, I want to talk a little bit about the overlap between fiction and nonfiction. And, but I want to start with, how do you pick a subject? What makes something worthwhile to write about?
Well, I feel that for me, the essays come out of two things. Sometimes it is a subject in which I am really interested. For example, in the collection Normal, I had been watching a talk show, and I had noticed that they had a bunch of guests who were trans women. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And I watched several of these shows, and I realized they were never having anybody who was a trans man on. And I kept thinking, well, where are they? They must also be in this world. And so the research led me to think, this is a really interesting subject, and it's a way of opening the door to one of my particular interests, which is the role that gender plays both in our public and our private lives. So that was a big subject, and I wanted to do that. But I also have written essays about, getting married for the second time at 50, and what a good and bad idea that was. And that just came out of my own experience and my own feelings about it, and my sister, my big sister, calling me to tell me what to wear. And then I realized that every single person in my family had weighed in on the subject of what I should wear, what we should serve, whether or not there should be dancing, who should officiate. And it was a great opportunity for me to actually write about my family.
Okay, so the first instance that you cited about watching this television program and going, wait, where are the trans men? You almost noticed that there was an absence in the discussion, in the narrative of this topic. So what about with getting married? You said, so getting married for the second time at 50 or over 50. How do you know that's going to be a good story? How do you know that that makes for something worthwhile to tell?
Well, you don't always know. I mean, my hope is that there seem to me to be several pillars that I could sort of rest the essay on. One is my voice as a writer, which, since I've been at it for a while, at least I am familiar with it. I know how I sound. I know that I can write in sort of a funny and entertaining fashion. And also, when I began to think about it, I felt that I had these distinctive points. I had my sister's intervention. I have 3 children. Each of them had something to say. So there I go, 1, 2, 3. I had my oldest and best friend who also had things to say. And then I had the dance lessons that my husband-to-be and I were undertaking. And finally, I had the comments from a very dear friend who was a poet, who kept helping me with my vows, which I thought was going to work well as the end piece.
You had a bunch of material. You could see it. You could go, that's going to be interesting, that's going to be interesting, or slightly unusual, or different. I mean, have you read things that were similar to what you'd written?
I don't think that there's I mean, what I was writing about with the second wedding was not that unusual a subject. We weren't getting married, on Mount Everest or underseas or in a shark cage. I mean, we weren't doing anything very interesting. But what is always interesting to me, and I guess the fact is it's the only thing that's interesting to me, is people and their relationships and the gap between what they say and how they feel, and the gap between how they feel and how they think, and the gap between what they show and what they hide. Is like that gap between the sidewalk and the road, that little area in the curb. That's where I live as a writer. That's the only thing that's interesting to me. So for me, the essay about the second wedding was really a chance not to write so much about the wedding industry, although I did get in a few remarks, because horribly second weddings are known as encore weddings, which just seemed to me just beyond grim. And that also helped me write more about it.
What was the title of this, by the way? Do you remember?
I think it was called something like Married at 50, Climbing Mount Everest in Heels, which is crazier.
That's funny. Which you obviously did not do.
Climbing Mount Everest
Right.
in heels? Does that seem likely? No, I did not.
But it's funny because you said the story would have popped out more if I had gotten married on Mount Everest, right?
Right, and so that everything that makes the essay work is not the unusual, it's the point of view, it's the voice.
Right. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, have you ever approached something, we got, oh my God, this is going to be the greatest story ever, and then at some point either realized that what you were working on did not have what it took to be a story, or was disappointed by the response from the reader?
Well,
Tell us some of
my failures.
Yeah, let's talk about failure.
I think it's important to talk about failure. I think the reason you workshop your material is to reveal the disasters and the wounds and to get help with it. There's no point in bringing in work that you think is brilliant and polished for help. You want to bring in your maimed.
Right.
So for me, I never think, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be fascinating. I always think to myself, oh, who cares, Amy? You know, what possible difference can it make what you put in the lasagna? But I think my interest in people and my essays, my personal essays about my own life tend to be fairly lighthearted. There are a lot of essays I won't write. And this is not that I don't think other people shouldn't write them, but I remember years ago reading an essay by a woman I knew, and it was about having a fight with her daughter and slapping her across the face. And her daughter was at the time a teenager, and I said to her, did your daughter read it? And she said, well, I told her about it and I changed her name. And I thought, that would not be okay for me. If when my kids were teenagers, the only time I ever wrote about them was sort of in the most minor way and with their permission. But that was a choice I made about how it felt to me. I also think there's a difference between writing about your parents and writing about your children. Chekhov says, you don't become the writer you are meant to be until your parents are dead. And there's certainly an argument to be made. And I'm not saying you should kill your parents. I'm just saying that you're going to recognize that you run into your own speed bumps, what they call in the island sleeping policeman. You know, it's just going to slow you down in your path. And I had to be mindful.
Slow you down in your path because you can't be entirely honest when your parents are still alive.
I think it's difficult. I mean, unless you are so angry with them that you don't care what how you might hurt their feelings, which is perfectly legitimate in a lot of circumstances. Or your parents are of a nature that they are completely fine with whatever you write, and that's a wonderful thing to encounter.
And then there's that famous Philip Roth quote about when a writer is born into a family, you know what I'm talking about, then that family is over. That it's almost like the thing that will detonate the family. So slapping the child across the face, the daughter, let's say, I'm not saying this has happened in your life, but if you had something that you wanted to write about, then would you say, probably not going to go for personal essay with that. I'll go to it with fiction.
Absolutely.
So I can bury it more?
Absolutely. It's just a few more levels and a few more layers of altered detail that make that possible. I have definitely felt that way in short stories that grew out of something that had also been a personal experience, but I just feel that it is the greatest value in the personal essay is the essay itself, not necessarily in my exposing somebody in my family to that same level of scrutiny and detail. So I prefer essays that are mostly about my experience with something. You know, I wrote an essay about falling in love with my husband, the guy who I married at 50. And there's very little that is revealed in that except about my own limitations and my own fears and my own, self-awareness and self-doubt. I certainly could have thrown in the opinions of my adolescent children at the time. But I think that
The opinions of the man you're marrying.
yes, the opinions of the man I was
Right,
marrying, and
right.
also the opinions of my kids, and I just felt like I didn't wish to expose them in that
Sure.
way. On the other hand, there are essays I haven't written that I hope I will get to write.
So if you're going from, let's say, slap across the face, okay, I'm going to make that a story. What would happen in that?
Well,
Like, how does that get buried?
I think for me, the slap across the face is not enough of a story.
Sure.
And that's one of the ways in which a personal essay can be different. The personal essay can be the slap across the face. But when I was a girl, when I was 13, my mother was telling me how I should be more accommodating to my father and nicer to him, as she was. And I said to her, which I remember vividly standing in our kitchen, and I said to her, I don't have to be nice to him. I didn't marry him, and I wouldn't. And my mother just cracked me across the
Wow.
face. That was a great moment to write about. And I would write about that in a personal essay, or because my mother is no longer alive, I would write about that in a piece of fiction. But that would have been, in a piece of fiction, a piece about what was happening in the family at the time. And I probably would have written some from the mother's point of view
Right.
as well as the daughter's point of view.
Right. So so context comes in, and it can help change and clarify things.
It can open it up. I think, looking at it this way, I would say, from my point of view as a personal essayist, if I had something I wanted to say about, the small moments of violence in a family, I would write that as an essay. But again, the slap itself, for me as an essay, is not enough for an essay and not enough for a short story. The fact that I have feelings about it is not sufficient to support the narrative. There's got to be something besides the fact that it matters to me. And I think that's the difference between writing in your journal and writing to be read.
That's a great way to end. Thanks, Amy.
You're very welcome.
We'll have Amy back next week. We'll talk more. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about the overlap or what we could borrow from fiction when talking about true stories. So now I'm going to segue just slightly away from that, but I still want to keep a concept in your head. And so this one, we're going to talk about how do we train our eye to be like a filmmaker's. Now, again, I'm not talking that we're going to make things up, but I'm talking about how does the eye as a writer decide what to include when we're describing something. So do you remember the list I asked you to do of 1 through 50 if you're 50 years old, or 1 through 100 if you're 100 years old, and of course leaving some lines blank if you felt like nothing significant had happened in that year. Here's the thing, if only it was that easy just to list the things in our life. This happened, that happened, this other thing happened, here's my story, I'm giving it to you, the reader. But that's not what writing is about. That's not what creative writing is about. It's about finding small moments, it's about finding details, it's about finding nuance. So what we're going to be talking about is the filmmaker's eye, and how do we get that into prose. I want you to go back to the early memory, your first memory that you wrote down. What did you include in that memory? Is it just action? Is it just I was walking down the street and I got lost and then a neighbor found me? Or are there details about maybe the way the light looked, if that's something you remember, or what you were wearing, if that's something you remember? Maybe you heard a sound. I'm not asking you to make it up. I'm asking to see if that in what you wrote, there were any of these small details. There are details that you might remember and that you would put in, the small detail. The question is, what have you put on the page? So what I'm asking is that us as a writer, we need to be able to see specifically what we've put on the page. We need to be able to take a step back and go, the reader knows nothing about me, they know nothing about my background, they know nothing about where I was. What have I actually put on the page? So do you remember the anecdote that I was telling about wanting to be an actor, and what would I describe in this room? And what details would I choose? So those are all really important, like what's the important detail? The question is it on the page? And often writers think they've given the reader so much, when really they haven't given the reader that much at all. So let's take a look at something. Imagine if this is what you were looking at. Totally black. You're not seeing anything. All you're hearing is the sound of my voice. You don't want a scene in your story to look like this. You want it to look like this, with the camera on, with all of these details being shown. So, here's a character from the story that you're writing. I want you to write in, let's say, 20 to 30 words. You can go longer if you want. I want you to describe this as a character in your story and what the physical descriptions are for the reader. Take as much time as you need. You just saw the silhouette. You wrote 20 to 30 words about it. Now, I want you to take a look at what some of my students came up with when I gave them this exercise. It was late at the bar, and the dim lights that lightened the dark old wood flickered in the face of the drunk. He had his face lying on the wood when the woman walked in. He could barely see her through the haze. All that he could see was her silhouette. From his point of view, she had her hair in a bun that was being covered by a scarf wrapped around her head. She wore elaborate earrings that dangled down to her shoulders. But that was all, he thought. He was unsure. It could have been anyone, but needless to say, he was confused as to what this mysterious figure was doing in a bar that was home to only a couple of regulars. The assignment was, or the exercise was, here's the character in your story. Describe this character so the reader can see them. What do you think? Did the student successfully translate what was on the page into prose? Where did the author provide more than what was actually there? Let's look at his excerpt again, and let's see precisely what was rendered accurately. That's what we're looking for. I'm not talking about whether or not the prose he wrote was good. I'm saying, is what he did accurate to the image? Here it is again. So all of this comes out. What remains specifically are the physical characteristics. Her hair in a bun, dangled down to her shoulders. He says elaborate earrings, but I don't think that's accurate. So something dangled down to her shoulders, and then that's it. Everything else comes out. It wasn't about that you're in a bar. We don't see a bar there on the page. We don't see dim lights. I don't even know who this person is who's speaking. What I wanted to do was just know this is the person, this is the character, describe them for the reader to see, understand what's on the page. Here's another example of that same silhouette. I see a woman who is acutely aware of the camera being pointed at her. That is why strands of her hair are bouncing near her head. She has turned in order to address her viewer, and they have fallen suddenly out of her bun. She cares about her appearance, which is why she's tied up her hair in the first place. She wants to appear coy, which is why her shoulders appear to be slanted. This is all an act. This is not a candid pose. Again, the prose is great, but we're not talking about the prose. We're saying, is the silhouette rendered accurately? Let's look at what I've edited out. I see a woman who's acutely aware of the camera being pointed at her. That comes out. We don't know that. What we do know is strands of her hair are bouncing near her head. She has turned. Now the author put in order to address her viewer. We don't know that either. She cares about her appearance. We don't know that. Tied up her hair. That we know. We can see that. She wants to appear coy. We don't know that. This is all an act. This is not a candid pose. If we're just looking for physical characteristics, all of that comes out. We're not trying to get inside of her head. None of that has been given to us. All right. Here's the last one. Here's the last attempt at it. Her hair is loosely tied into a bun, which rests on her head like a sloppy hill, with two strands of wavy hair dangling next to her cheeks. Her head is tilted towards her left so that one of the strands touches her left shoulder. What do you think about that as being an accurate representation of what was on the page? For me, I gave that 0 edits. I thought the student had trained her eye to see specifically what was being put there. Let me point out one thing too. The simile, which rests on her head like a sloppy hill. The simile, something looks like something else, that's helping the reader to see. The bottom line of all of this is that silhouette, there really isn't all that much to describe. You don't want your character to look like the silhouette. You want your character in your story to look like this, or like this, or even like this. And to continue this with buildings, you don't want your building to look like this necessarily, but rather like this or like this. We just worked on seeing what was on the page. We're not trying to make that silhouette into vivid prose. We're trying to say, how do we describe this limited image? How would that look in prose? Now we're going to do the reverse. We're going to look at very vivid prose and see how that works. Take a look at this. "What's your name, sir?" The freckled woman wore green stretch pants and had her red hair tucked under a neat pink scarf. "Fred?" She was making her naturally coarse voice go soft and moist as warm mayonnaise. "I'd like you to meet my girlfriends, Fred." The 4 girls stared at him. 2 sat up and smiled, holding their purses with tight fingers, their legs pinched together at the knees. A beautiful black-haired girl with jutting cheekbones and a lush, full mouth lolled in an orange beanbag chair. Her long legs sprawled rudely on the floor, half open and tenting her tight silk dress so you could almost see between her legs. She gawked at him with open disgust. That passage is from Mary Gaitskill's short story, Something Nice. Look at all the color that she used. Green, red, pink, black, orange. Let's look at the other descriptors. Freckled, stretch, neat, coarse, soft, moist, warm, tight, pinched, beautiful, jutting, lush, full, lolled, beanbag, sprawled rudely, gawked. Vivid prose. Now what happens if we strip it all away? "What's your name, sir?" The woman wore pants and had her hair tucked under a scarf. "Fred?" Now notice I'm cutting out, she was making her naturally coarse voice go soft and moist as warm mayonnaise. We're cutting out all the descriptors. "I'd like you to meet my girlfriends, Fred." The 4 girls stared at him. 2 sat up and smiled, holding their purses with fingers, their legs together at the knees. A girl with cheekbones and a mouth in a chair, her long legs on the floor, half open and tenting her tight silk dress so you could almost see between her legs. And I cut out, she gawked. So which one is more vivid? Obviously, I would say it's the first one that we looked at with all the color, all the descriptors. The scene that we edited where we stripped away all the descriptors. Imagine if we were making a film of that, what would happen? We could first of all shoot it in black and white because all the color is gone. We might not even need sound because we've stripped away how things are being said. We could, for the things that are remaining being said, we could just use title cards like they do in a silent movie. We would need 6 actors still. We'd need the woman with the pants. We'd need Fred, and we'd need 4 other girls. We would need a few props, purse, chair. We would need some sort of set, but that hasn't been defined. We would need our costume designer to give us a dress, scarf, pants, but remember, all the color is gone. We would need a hairstylist for the beautiful black hair and the hair that's tucked under the scarf. Movies don't have any smell, of course, but if they did, we would not need any smell for this scene. And movies don't have touch either, but this scene wouldn't need it. They wouldn't need taste. I want you to go back to that early memory that you wrote. If you were going to shoot that memory as a film, if you were going to bring in a production crew and make that movie, make that scene into a movie, what would you need? I want you to list it. How many actors would you need? Would you need a costume designer? Would you need a hairstylist? I'm not asking you to do this just for the sake of having a hairstylist or a costume designer. I'm just asking you to look to see how descriptive it is, how vivid the prose is that you wrote of that early memory. Would you need a makeup person? Would you need a set designer? Is there even a set in your early memory? Think back. Go back to that early memory. Is there anything that you can bring up? Remember, very, very small details can make very big images. We've been looking at two fundamental things, which is the detail from the experience that we've lived, and then, because we're being creative writers, are we getting that experience onto the page? And that's what's important. And how can we tell if we've gotten it onto the page? So we looked at a silhouette, stripped down, and said, let's replicate that into prose. And then we looked at really vivid prose and said, what if we stripped out all of those details in a way almost to get it back to the idea of the silhouette? Now we're going to look at a third version. And this is from a graphic memoir by John Porcellino, who wrote about his experiences dealing with a mysterious illness that he couldn't cure and that went on for years. And here's the image, as you can see, and it's just from page 30 of his memoir. And just look at the image and see what would we need if we're going to make this into a film. Again, this is about how are we training our eye as a filmmaker. So, we need how many actors for this film? I count 2. And here are the props for our film. It looks like we need an IV, we need a bed, a tube, we need a sun. Do we need any color? No, because everything is black and white. Do we need sound? Yes, we're going to need a sound engineer because there are beeping sounds and we have to render the dialogue. Is there any smell? And again, in film you can have smell, but here I don't see any smell according to John Porcellino's images. Is there taste or touch? What about the costumes? Looks like we need 2 white shirts and that's it. I think the female character might be wearing a necklace, but I'm not sure. So the question is, are John Porcellino's images vivid enough? Or are they vivid? If you were a filmmaker, you'd be able to point the camera in the hospital room and this is what it would show. It would pick up all the small details. And there's obviously more detail in this than really a writer could render unless you wanted to spend pages and pages talking about the way the blanket looks and the way the light is coming through and the way there's a wrinkle here and there. All of these very, very fine-tuned details which might not be essential for the scene you're trying to tell. You're just trying to you're trying to create an image for the reader to see. So I gave this graphic image from John Porcellino's memoir to my students, and I asked them to now translate this entirely into prose. And let's take a look at what they came up with. I couldn't stop looking at Kira, the way she couldn't stop rubbing her hands together, that look on her face like it would crumble, that green guacamole stain from the day before we came here. She was looking at the doctor, listening, trying to jump in. She didn't understand all the medical garb, and she just wanted to help me. Finally, she lost her patience, and she cut into the middle of the doctor's sentence sharply. He took charcoal pills this afternoon because he thought he might have food poisoning. That's why it's black. It goes on. I'm editing it there because we don't really need to see the rest. We get the idea of what's going on. Let's look at everything that the student inferred or invented just based on the images that was given to us. So out comes, I couldn't stop looking at Kira, the way she couldn't stop rubbing her hands together, that look on her face like it would crumble, that green guacamole stain from the day before we came here. All of that is going out. John Porcellino has not put any of that in there. There is no guacamole stain. And of course, since it's black and white, if there was a guacamole stain, we wouldn't even know because we can't see the color green. Here's what else came out. She was looking at the doctor, listening, trying to jump in. She didn't understand all the medical garb. I don't see another doctor in this scene. Remember, we're just looking at what's on the page. We're training our eye, what's on the page. Here's what else comes out, and she just wanted to help me. Finally, she lost her patience, and she cut into the middle of the doctor's sentence sharply. This is the only part that remains because this is what John Porcellino gave us. He took charcoal pills this afternoon because he thought he might have food poisoning. That's why it's black. Why is my student adding so much? Is he trying to say that Porcellino hasn't provided enough to make this scene dynamic? And yet, let me show you that my student went back to the drawing board and came up with this. Here's where he's training his eye to see what's on the page and how to get it into prose. Kira was standing, her eyebrows raised, and her mouth was open at an angle. I heard her say, he took charcoal pills this afternoon because he thought he might have food poisoning. That's why it's black. She was talking about the liquid, thick and soupy, that was slinking through the tube from my nose and into something I couldn't see. I squinted my eyes as tightly as I could, trying to deal with the discomfort, and I felt my whole body trembling. Here the student is looking at the page and saying, what you've given me, John Porcellino, is enough to create these, about 6 or 7 sentences of prose. Let me just give one more paragraph. I had an IV in my arm, and Kira sat by my side and did not get up. She had her hand on my abdomen, reaching for mine, but I was having trouble responding. And just to interrupt, look at how all of that is shown in the image. I wanted to say something, but the thinking was taking over the ability to speak. I might be dying kept etching itself silently across my brain. I kept my eyes closed tightly, and I began to feel sweat forming on my forehead. It dripped down my face and onto my cheek. I think the lesson here is that there's actually quite a lot happening in this scene if you focus on the details, if you focus on what you remember. Maybe all we remember from that time in the hospital, let's say that we were in the hospital, is that there was a black tube and that Kira had her hand on ours. That is a small detail, but it can go a long, long way. I encourage you, stick with what you know, stick with what you remember, and what you know might be totally fine. It might be good enough. Here are some stills from some famous movies. We don't have any narrative or dialogue, but we do have detail, just conveyed through image. If you were going to convey those images into prose, what would you do? You might describe the watch on the doctor's wrist. You might describe the frame painting on the wall, the way the light is coming through the blinds in The Sixth Sense. You might describe Seth Rogen's posture. Are these important details? Maybe you focused on that frame painting on the wall and it provided some comfort to you, and you stared at it as you were undergoing your ordeal. Doesn't matter. The ultimate point is that a writer trains themselves to be able to know what they've put on the page and what they've left off. I'm going to talk about the inherent drama of the white page. Here's what's happening with a filmmaker. They have a decided advantage over a writer in that they can tell us meaning the reader or the viewer, what's important to focus on. If there are 100 faces in the crowd, the camera could zoom in on the one face that the filmmaker wanted you to follow. If someone brings a gun, for instance, the camera can linger on the gun and alert the reader that this is something important, that this is going to be an important prop. In filmmaking, no gesture, no prop, nothing is too small. The question is, as a writer, we're writing about our lives. How do we let the reader know that this moment that we're writing about, this moment in time, is the big moment, is a significant moment that we want the reader to focus on more than the other moments that have preceded it? I'm not talking about ignoring what's come before. I'm saying, here is a moment, reader, that I want you to linger on. We don't have a camera. How do we get the reader to linger? Or think about some of the most famous movie music in the world. This is where the filmmaker can let you know that what is happening on screen is essential, or something essential is about to happen. That's how Steven Spielberg helped guide you through the narrative of his film and got you to focus on and understand the significance of the shark fin. Or, say for instance, just as an example, I'm holding a pen in my right hand. It's just an innocuous prop right now. What if I wanted the reader to know that this pen was going to be essential in the story I was telling? If I was a filmmaker, I could zoom in on that pen. But a reader, we can't zoom in on something. There's something else we have to do. Otherwise, this is just a prop right now. Zoomed in, it becomes something significant. We're telling the audience, pay attention to this. There's going to be something important about this pen. What does the writer do? We don't have the camera. How are we going to alert the reader that something's important? Take a look at this simple sentence. But then she went back home to see her real patients. What can we do with this to alert the reader that out of everything that's on the page, this is an important thing to pay attention to? Well, we could add words. But then she went back home to see her real patients, which was really an important and powerful thing to do. Just telling the reader right away, focus on this. Or you could just repeat it the way we do sometimes when we talk and just want to make sure someone didn't miss what we said. But then she went back home to see her real patients. But then she went back home to see her real patients. Or we could do something typographical, all caps. But then she went back home to see her real patients. Or we could do an exclamation mark. But then she went back home to see her real patients. Or we could make it bold. Or we could double the size. Or if there was something more subtle in the sentence that you wanted to have land with a louder thump, but then she went back home to see her real patients. Let me suggest something contradictory, that there is actually the absence of something that will make the thing you're writing hit louder. Here's where this sentence came from. It was from a student of mine who was writing about her mental health struggles as a young woman. And what she wrote, and this is exactly in the prose in which she wrote it: I meditated twice a day. I prayed vehemently. I went to spiritual motivational lectures. I went to church. I read book after book of spiritual advice, but I still couldn't choose happiness. You can't choose not to have bipolar II disorder. I trusted nobody. I tried everything. I was beyond help. I started swallowing 5 Klonopins a day to quell the crying. I started drafting suicide notes in my mind and then on paper. I spent several nights on my bathroom floor with the bottle of Klonopin in my right pale, bony hand and a bottle of silver Jose Cuervo in my left, tears streaming down my gaunt face, halfway to a full attempt, but I couldn't finish. My mom was in Boston for a psychoanalytic conference. I called her. I felt terrified of myself. She brought me to a therapist. Can you keep yourself safe? I was crying too hard to answer and was sent to the psych ward. My mom visited me for a day while she was still in Boston for the conference, but then she went back home to see her real patients. My student opted to follow a poetic structure in the prose where almost every idea is given its own line. She's even broken some sentences right in the middle. This is an experience that she actually lived and now she's expressing it. And here's what she said about her style of writing, quote, I fear the reader won't take my pain seriously unless I really highlight it. My suggestion to her was that if everything is important, if everything becomes highlighted, then it begins to lose its impact. It would be equivalent of writing everything like this, huge type. So the first thing I suggest is let's close up all the sentences. Let's just see what happens when it's just one paragraph. I want you to keep in mind that white space is one of the most powerful aspects of writing. It's actually the absence of words. But yet, there is one bit of white space that still exists in the piece, and it's at the very, very end. But then she went back home to see her real patients, and that's followed by white space. By ending the paragraph with that line, she's able to emphasize the power and importance of her relationship with her mother. The reader's attention is brought to that without having to actually bring the reader's attention to it. Let's look at another version of this prose. It's the same thing, but now I've broken it in 2 spots. There are 2 big moments in this passage that I'm emphasizing. The first, that line, I spent several nights on my bathroom floor with the bottle of Klonopin in my right pale, bony hand and a bottle of silver Jose Cuervo in my left, tears streaming down my gaunt face, halfway to a full attempt, but I couldn't finish. I broke it there. White space follows. We begin the next paragraph. My mom was in Boston for a psychoanalytic conference, and then we end, but then she went back home to see her real patients. Another break, more white space. If the author wanted to emphasize her point even more, she could add additional white space in the form of a section break, halfway to a full attempt, but I couldn't finish. And now we've given more white space. We're in a way giving more breath to that moment. We're letting the reader understand this is something to focus on without necessarily having to make the type huge, to put an exclamation mark there, to make it bold. I want to go back to what my student said about her stylistic choice to write with almost every sentence having its own line. I fear the reader won't take my pain seriously unless I really highlight it. She has the right instinct to highlight certain things, but that music from Jaws, one of the reasons why that music is so powerful is that it is used so sparingly in the film. If the entire movie was that music, the audience would quickly become inured to it. Stick around. Amy Bloom is coming back. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these things that we've been discussing. Hi everyone, we're back with Amy Bloom to talk more about what we were just talking about, which is how to train your eye when you're writing to be like a filmmaker's. So, but before we do that, I want to go back to last week's interview, because I did have a question for you. We were talking about a slap across the face. Mm-hmm. And so on that idea, how do you write an unlikable character? And let me just preface this by saying you have a short story, very powerful short story about an incestuous relationship. And just as a launching pad, was that a difficult character to write from point of view? And just in general, do you write unlikable characters?
I think I do write unlikable characters. I think I often like unlikable characters. What I feel about my characters, whether it's in nonfiction or fiction, is that I don't have to like them, but I do have to love them in some way. You know, the goal is not to judge them and not to say to the reader, hey, aren't they awful? Let's all agree to have contempt for this character. Mm-hmm. That's not interesting to me. That's a cartoon in which the villains are evil and you can tell because of their costumes, and the good guys are wonderful and they are always wonderful in every way, and you can tell that from their costumes too. It's like, that's not how real life is. People who do bad things don't necessarily see themselves as bad people. Mm-hmm. And people who are bad people don't necessarily see themselves as bad people. People who often do bad things often think to themselves, I am a victim, mm-hmm. I am misunderstood, I am badly treated, I am unappreciated, maybe I can try this and things will be better. So unlikable for me is not a big problem. I think that sometimes there's this feeling that likable means relatable, and then you add like a little dash of unlikable to make them even more relatable. But I think that people are complicated. Mm-hmm. I have seen people who I consider to be very harsh and very difficult show great kindness and great warmth. I always think about what happens when somebody in the family dies and you have a funeral and everybody is coming over and they're bringing casseroles and they're stopping by and they're helping out. But sometimes the people who you knew the least or who you like the least are the most helpful, and sometimes the person you had really counted on to show up is like, yeah, I got to go to the store and I'll try to stop by later. And you say, could you bring something? We're going to have 20 people over. And they go, oh gosh, I wish I could. Mm-hmm. And you never hear from them again. And so there are occasions that people rise to, and there are occasions that they fail to rise to, again, which is what's really interesting in the dynamic of the essay.
And maybe the way I phrase the question, it could be slightly incorrect, that it's not necessarily an unlikable character. It's that we're looking for characters who have a little something that seems to go outside of their nature. That if here's someone who was so nice, but they didn't show up to the funeral, that we're looking for a little blip in them so that it doesn't always seem like you can be so predictable as a character.
Yes, because people are not actually predictable. I mean, our natures are sort of set from an early age, but we still surprise ourselves and we surprise other people. There's an English dessert or pudding called blancmange, which is basically, as far as I can tell, a giant blob of slightly jellyish white stuff. It has no shape, it has no form, it's mildly sweet, it's not going to offend anybody. But people are not like that. People have odd corners and things sticking out and something you didn't expect. And right in the middle of the blancmange, there's the jalapeno pepper. I mean, people are surprised. And what's interesting in writing, I think, whether it's in fiction or nonfiction, is the surprises that seem both a genuine surprise and also maybe inevitable.
Mm-hmm. All right, I want to switch gears and talk about detail, observation, that, and I've said this before, when we're writing, it's not a matter of just listing what has happened, it's a matter of trying to find certain texture and detail, small moments. We need to be observers, writers. What details are important? How do you know what I should put in? If we were going to describe this now, this interview, what would you describe? Are you going to describe that I'm wearing a watch? Are you going to describe my shoes?
I'm not going to describe that you're wearing a watch.
No, why not?
If it's because I don't care. I mean, somebody else. Like
you don't like that watch?
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice enough.
Right.
And maybe if the point of the story was how much time we had together, I might put in the watch. But what I am struck by, and I guess this is part of what I really think, which is that there is nothing observed without the observer. It's not the thing. Mm-hmm. It's who's seeing it. What does it mean to them? That's how it leads to your story. I mean, sometimes the detail is extraordinary. You know, if you were sitting there and you had a tattoo from here to your mic on your chest and your body was covered with it, and it was a big red rose with bright green leaves, I probably have to comment on it, regardless of whether it really mattered to me, because it would be so striking and perhaps unexpected. But most details are not like that. Mm-hmm. They are facts of observation. You got to say, well, what does that have to do with the story? So for me, what is striking to me is how much you look like an uncle of mine. Uh-huh. And so when I am looking at you, part of
was he a good guy, by the way? Was he a likable character?
He was a very likable character. And so I recognize that, like, in looking at you, I already feel warmly towards you. You already seem familiar to me. And the past and the present are colliding even as I am observing you. And those become the important details.
So in that, if you were going to write that story, then you would describe my face.
I would describe your eyes. Okay. And I would then be writing about my Uncle Morty, who taught piano in Queens, New York.
I love it. So now with a film, the advantage that a filmmaker has is they just point the camera and they will take in every single detail. They'll have this watch.
Right.
But for a writer, we have to be more selective about it.
Right, and even when you're filmmaking, because I also write for television, you make a decision about, am I doing a close-up on the watch and what does it signify? Mm-hmm. I might take in your entire presence in the camera shot, but the close-up is a statement. Right. And it's just like being the writer. What am I emphasizing?
That's right. Uh-huh.
Not just what am I seeing.
So if you were going to do that in prose, what's the close-up that you use in prose? How do we get a close-up of the watch? Is it just a matter of mentioning the watch?
You might mention the watch, but you'd again want to say to yourself, why? In the universe of details, why this detail and why now? Which seems to me the two crucial questions. That is the way in which sometimes writing is a little bit like psychoanalysis, which is the important questions about the narrative is, why this? Why now? Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to write about the watch, it might be because I'm thinking to myself, oh, how much time do we have left to be together? Or how much longer is this going to last?
Right.
And either way, the watch comes into it. Or it might be because I want to draw attention to your hands, which again remind me of Uncle Morty,
Wow.
the piano player.
Maybe we're related. I don't know. Who knows? We did a little family tree.
We could do a little family.
All right. Thank you, Amy. And we're going to be back at the end of the course and talk with Amy one more time. We're going to talk about openings. How do we begin the thing we're going to write about ourselves? What do we do? I want you to keep in mind that there are no rules to writing. That's one thing. And yet, things aren't random. Authors, they practice, they think about how they're going to put things down on the page. It might seem seamless when you read it as a reader, but authors are constantly trying to figure out what's the best way that something might work. So, we're going to subvert the adage that is very famous that we've always heard, don't judge a book by its cover. I'm going to actually suggest that what we do constantly, maybe not even consciously, is that we're judging. We're judging the thing we're reading. And when it begins, we're already making assumptions about what the story will be about, even in the first few lines. So as a writer, keep that in mind. Keep in mind that the reader is trying to jump ahead of you slightly. Let's look at something that's not writing. We're going to listen to some pieces of music and just a few seconds of it, and I want you to listen to it, the beginning of the song, and then think about what this song might be about. What mood is it evoking? Can you tell what the characters will be? Maybe not, but there's going to be something in you that will begin making assumptions of what this song will be. So listen to this. So you heard that. Doesn't matter whether or not you've ever heard that song before in your life. In fact, if you have heard the song before, your job in this game we're playing is to imagine that you haven't. So what will that song be about? Is it going to be about love? Is it going to be about loss? Is it going to be about violence? Whatever it is. But you're making certain assumptions just on the opening notes before any word has been spoken. Okay, so we're going to do another one. Let's listen to this. And again, remember, if you've heard this before, your job is to pretend that you've never heard it before. You're reading, you're listening with fresh eyes. Okay. Okay, so again, same questions. What will this be about? You haven't heard one word, there's been no dialogue, there's been no narrative, and yet the notes are indicating something. Is it indicating love? This is going to be a love story? Is it going to be a comedy? Whatever it's going to be, you're already making these assumptions. All right, so now we're going to do the last one. You've never heard this before, even if you have. Listen to this. Okay, again, love story, comedy, horror. What will this story be about? What's the narrative? But wait, I want to just go a few more moments into this particular song and listen to what happens now.
If you had one shot, one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it?
Aha! So what happened there? Eminem tricked you a little bit. He set you up for something. He said, this story is going to be this, and then he changed, and he went into something else. So he created a surprise on you. He subverted the narrative. And I know what you're saying. You're going, okay, that's great. We're talking about songs, but what we're doing here is this is supposed to be about memoirs, this is supposed to be about personal essays, it's supposed to be about us writing about ourselves. But I want you to keep in mind that it doesn't matter what genre you're working in, it doesn't even matter what medium you're working in, that there are storytelling elements that remain true for whatever we're doing. So in the next lecture, we're going to look at specific opening lines and see what effect they have. I'm going to call this the game of how do we get them to the second line. And remember, you're allowed to judge. It's all about judging. I want you to make assessments. I want you to have a bias. But part of this game is that, let's say if you're not a fan of dogs or dog stories, that can't prejudice you against deciding whether or not a certain opening works just because there's a dog in it, okay? So we're going to look at some openings, fiction and nonfiction, and then you're going to decide and we're going to talk about if these are effective or not. So let's start with looking at one of the more famous openings in personal essay by James Baldwin, and this is called Notes of a Native Son. And here's the opening passage. On the 29th day of July in 1943, my father died. On the same day, a few hours later, his last child was born. Over a month before this, while all our energies were concentrated in waiting for these events, there had been, in Detroit, one of the bloodiest race riots of the century. A few hours after my father's funeral, while he lay in state in the Undertaker's chapel, a race riot broke out in Harlem. On the morning of the 3rd of August, we drove my father to the graveyard through a wilderness of smashed plate glass. Okay, so what's Baldwin doing here? So one of the things I would suggest is that he's establishing what this story is going to be about at the very, very beginning. He's saying it's going to be about race. It's going to be about his father's death. Now, whether or not he satisfies what he's establishing in the opening in the next 10,000 words, that remains to be seen, but that's falling out of our purview. What we care about is an opening and whether or not it's grabbing you and whether or not it makes you want to continue reading. So let's look at some other opening lines. Here's the first one. In an ideal world, we would have been orphans. The second one. I want to make sure you get home safe, my rapist said as he walked me to my car. 3. When I was 6, I saw my uncle slap, punch, and kick the young boy who lived in his house. 4. Bunny, she yelled even more loudly than before. Number 5. I sat itching my leg while Alexander reprimanded me. Number 6. We shot dogs. Number 7. Because nothing changes. Okay, so what we're looking for is what's the strongest way to open these stories. We've got 7 opening lines from different pieces in front of us. And if you said number 4 and number 5 were a bit too generic or vague, I would agree with you. Because, for instance, I don't know who Bunny is. I don't know who she is in that line, which is, Bunny, she yelled even more loudly than before. I don't know if Bunny is an animal or a person. If she's yelling it louder than before, then what was happening before? Basically, there are more questions being raised here in this opening line, which is what, about 8 words, and none of them make me want to get to the next line. And let's look at number 5, which is, I sat itching my leg while Alexander reprimanded me. So is this a skin disease? Who is the I in this sentence? Who is Alexander? The line, we shot dogs, raises a lot of questions. Who shot these dogs? Why did you shoot these dogs? The point is, the key is not to avoid raising questions in the reader, but to raise a compelling enough question that we want to see how it's answered, that we're going to basically get to line number 2. So there's something very important to keep in mind. When we're writing about ourselves, the impulse might be to say, well, it's going to be chronological. I'll begin with the beginning of my life or the first moment of this story. But that's not what we're looking for when we're trying to tell a creative story. What we're looking for is what is the most compelling, interesting way to begin and grab the reader. And that moment might actually be from something later, but it will be more compelling if we bring that moment up. So chronology is not something that we're terribly interested in. What we're interested in is keeping the reader interested. Now here's a tricky one. Number 7, because nothing changes. If you're on the fence about number 7, because nothing changes, that's okay. That's a tricky one. It's not really giving us a lot to go on. It's just 3 words. We're not sure what the nothing is. Why do I want to get to sentence number 2? But hang on to that because we're going to come back to that one in a future lecture. And then here's the opening line to my memoir, which is, my father believes the United States is destined one day to be engulfed in a socialist revolution. And all I was hoping for was that would be interesting enough to the reader just to want to get them to line number 2. We're going to talk about second lines now. And one analogy that might be helpful is the idea of the Big Bang, where everything was crammed into this very, very small speck of dust, all the energy, and then it expanded. And in an opening line, that is sort of similar. The more you can pack in to that, the more places you have to go. Let's take a look at those first lines again, and then imagine what might happen next. In an ideal world, we would have been orphans. What's this going to be followed with? What do you want to know next? What questions is it raising? Think about the songs we listened to, the music without any words. We were already trying to determine, oh, this will be about this, this, and this. Here's the second line from that. We felt like orphans and we felt deserving of the pity that orphans get, but embarrassingly enough, we had 2 parents. Here's another opening line that we had looked at. I want to make sure you get home safe, my rapist said as he walked me to my car. What's this going to be followed with? What's line number 2 going to be? And here it is. It was after 2 a.m., the Sunday before Christmas, and snow was falling. When I was 6, I saw my uncle slap, punch, and kick the young boy who lived in his house. What do you want to know next now, you the reader? Do you want to know why that boy was slapped? Do you want to know who the narrator is? Do you want to know who the uncle is? And here's line number 2. This wasn't unusual in the India of the early 90s, and it isn't unusual even now. And here's that problematic opening line. Bunny, she yelled, even more loudly than before. What do we want to know? Do we want to know who Bunny is? Do we want to know who she is? Do we want to know what it means that now she's yelling more loudly than what was happening a moment earlier? Here's line number 2. It was cold and her breath was irregular from the walk back from the grocery store. My question to you is, how much is this adding to the story? Are you grabbed by this? Because I'm going to be honest, I'm not grabbed by what's happening now. And here's that other problematic line. I sat itching my leg while Alexander reprimanded me. Remember I was saying, is this about a skin disease? What's going on here? Here's line number 2. I just don't understand, Arnold. And here was that 6th opening line. We shot dogs. So do we want to know who the we is? Do we want to know why you're shooting these dogs? Do we want to know where you are? Ask yourself, if you were going to write the second line, what would that second line be? Are those questions going to be answered? And then here's the second line. Not by accident. And then this was the one that I said was a little bit tricky, because nothing changes. We don't know where they are. We don't know why nothing is changing. We don't know why we should care. And here's line number 2. The long afternoons kill you, the endless hours between 2 and 5. Now with that last one again, if you're still not sold on that, and if you're still a bit confused, we're going to come back to that soon in another lecture. Are you noticing any patterns with what we're looking at? I want to suggest that sometimes context is being given in line number 2. As with the line, this wasn't unusual in the India of the early 90s, and it isn't unusual even now. And also with the line, not by accident, the mystery is beginning to deepen there. I don't want you to confuse mystery with confusion. Mystery is good. You want the reader to be intrigued. You don't want them to be confused. We're going to look at that line that I keep referencing, because nothing changes. That's the opening line. And the second line was, the long afternoons kill you, the endless hours between 2 and 5. What I want you to do now is pause the video, and at the bottom of the screen is a link to the PDF. I want you to read the rest of the first page. We've now read the first page of Brian Charles's memoir, There's a Road to Everywhere Except Where You Came From. One of the questions is, by the way, how is this a memoir? He's writing in the second person. He's saying you. Remember how we said you couldn't tell the difference if something was written first, third, or second, whether or not it was personal essay? But this is memoir. What's the story about? Disaffected character and a boring job? Is the story itself boring? We've only read a few paragraphs. It was written by Brian Charles. And remember when we talked about first person, second person, third person? And you can't tell the difference between whether or not it's personal essay or fiction. Well, this is actually personal essay, even though it's written as you, because nothing changes, the long afternoons kill you. It's personal essay. Question is, has he created any drama with this? Is he creating any intrigue, any mystery? Where's this story going? What do you want to see happen? Do you care about the character? Do you care about anything the author is saying? We've talked a lot about opening lines, but there's one thing that precedes the opening line, and that's the title. This doesn't yet have a title to it. I wanted to show you how a title can change everything. You're going to give the reader a little bit of information before the story begins. What would you give this piece as a title? Boredom? Dead-end job? Is it about the aspiration to want to be a writer? Is there a title that you could come up with that would create an immense amount of drama? Here's the original title by Brian Charles. World Trade Center, Spring 2001. Now I want to go back and have you read the first page again, but with this title. And I wanted you to see how your feelings about what you're reading have changed. The video is going to pause. I want you to click on the link at the bottom of the screen and download the piece again. This time it's going to have the title. Yes, I want you to read the whole thing again, but now with this new title in mind. And I want you to see how it changes for you. You've read the version without the title that begins Because Nothing Changes, and then you read the version with the title, World Trade Center, Spring 2001. How has this been altered? Why has it been altered? Are you feeling any change or drama in yourself? Because Nothing Changes takes on a whole different meaning now, because we, the reader, know something will change. What Brian Charles has done is give the reader a little bit of information that the character himself does not yet know. This is the essence of tension, and Hitchcock talked about it. Here's the difference between surprise and tension. If you had read that entire piece and then gotten to the end of it and learned it was World Trade Center Spring 2001, that would be surprise. But because you have that information at the very beginning of the story, now you're feeling tension. And what Hitchcock said was, you could film a dinner scene between a couple, and if a bomb suddenly explodes from underneath the table, the audience will be surprised. You could film the same scene by having the audience see that there is a bomb underneath the table with the time ticking down. And now they're feeling tension because they know something that the characters themselves don't know. When we're working on our own pieces, yes, again, we're writing about our lives, but we're using storytelling elements to create tension, intrigue, and mystery within the reader. There are two things I want you to think about when you're opening your piece. What information do you want to reveal, and what information do you want to withhold? And everything's going to follow from that. Dialogue. Dialogue is what I'm doing right now. I'm standing here, I'm talking to you, I'm talking out loud. If we were going to make a scene out of this for a story, what would we do? Would we write down every single thing that I was saying? Would that be boring? Instead, we pick and choose. Dialogue is what I'm doing right now, he said. He was standing, facing the camera. He went on to explain how writing everything verbatim would become boring. Dialogue follows the same rules of description as anything else. You pick and choose. If I was going to describe this room, what would I put in it? Is every line of dialogue essential? If you were going to describe a scene in which you went to buy a cup of coffee, would you include every single line in that transaction? Hi, can I help you? I would like a double espresso. Would you like that hot or cold? I'm not sure. In other words, you're picking and choosing what is essential to create this scene. Dialogue is important for another reason. It's a way for the writer to show the reader something without having to tell them. You narrate, and then you give them a line of dialogue. Let's look at an example from a student of mine where she describes a scene with her father where they're arguing over what should she wear. Notice how she's using dialogue to break up the narration with short choice quotes from her father. No sooner did I set one foot out the door than my dad asked me to change my shoes. He said they looked way out of place and odd, inappropriate to be exact. His tone was commanding. I could feel my muscles start to tense up, as if an involuntary reflex to the impending choice between war and peace. A surge of justified anger took hold of me. How ridiculous is it to let your parents dictate what you wear? I snapped back, saying that it was nobody's business what I wore. And before I was able to realize the effect of that response, my dad's loud voice reverberated around the room. You do what I say and spare your nonsense. From the way she's writing, she sounds as if she specifically remembered what her father said. You do what I say and spare your nonsense. Inappropriate, that's in quotes. Notice that most of the dialogue is actually narrated. She's not putting in quotes this. I snapped back, saying that it was nobody's business what I wore. In a sense, she's paraphrasing that. It helps to keep the tempo going. It helps to create a nice flow to it. Sometimes I've written scenes from my childhood where I don't precisely remember what has happened, but I approximate it because I want to give a sense of what the action might be like. Here's an example from when I was 4 years old and I was having a conflict with my mother over a grape boycott in the United States where I wanted to eat grapes and she wouldn't allow me to. Is the boycott over yet? I'd ask my mother. Not yet, she'd say. When will the boycott be over? When the capitalists give the workers their rights? When will that happen? I don't know. When it happens, will we eat grapes? Yes. Weeks passed. Is the boycott over? No. Months passed. Is the boycott over? No. Fall came, then winter. Grapes were no longer in season. Is the boycott over? No. That was a scene between my mother and me. I was 4 years old. Again, do I remember exactly what lines we were saying to one another? No. But these were approximations of what we said. I wanted to show the reader what the conflict was like, not just narrate it. Dialogue is first and foremost sound. But unlike this, it can be elusive in how we describe it. Because dialogue also contains someone's facial expressions, which can contradict what is being said. For instance, if I said to you, I'm so glad to see you, that's one way of saying it. Or I could say, I'm so glad to see you, that's a whole other way. But the line is exactly the same. The question is, what do we do? How do we convey that this line of dialogue means this thing, or the same line of dialogue means something else? I want you to think about dialogue being as expressive as music. Let's take the example of a flute. If you had a flute in your story, how would you ever describe the sound of it? Here's a sample line from a personal essay. From the living room came the sound of Lisa's flute. Okay, what does Lisa's flute sound like? Can you convey the idea of sound to a reader? Could it sound like this? Or does it sound like this? So the line that you saw on screen, from the living room came the sound of Lisa's flute, is from a personal essay by David Sedaris. Let's see what he did in describing the sound of the flute. From the living room came the aimless whisper of Lisa's flute. It sounded not unlike the wind whipping through an empty Pepsi can. David Sedaris did not just tell you that a flute was playing, he told the reader how to hear it. And that same thing is with any line of dialogue. Going back to the line I gave earlier, I'm so glad to see you, as opposed to I'm so glad to see you. Two different things. I'm so glad to see you, he said, his eyes wide. I'm so glad to see you, he said, his eyes rolling. Again, you're letting the reader know what's being said, but also how to hear what's being said. Have you ever sent a text message where the meaning was misinterpreted? If someone texted, "Do you want to go to the beach?" and you wrote back, "Okay," this could be interpreted as if you're a little bit indifferent or unenthusiastic. If you were on the phone, of course, they'd be able to hear your tone and your emphasis. The best you can do through text is, actually what they've done is they've come up with something to help text, which is the emoji. The emoji is there because we've realized that dialogue without voice and sound can be very limited. Take a look at the word hello. How many different ways could you render the word hello in quotes? Here's what I've come up with. The point being, dialogue needs all the help we can give it in order to convey something. Let's go back to that scene where the young woman was arguing with her father over what she was supposed to wear. Here's what it would look like if it were only dialogue. Change your shoes. They look way out of place, odd and inappropriate. It's nobody's business what I wear. You do what I say and spare your nonsense. Okay. Let's look at everything that's been lost if we're just going to use dialogue alone. No sooner did I set one foot out the door than my dad asked me to change my shoes. That's lost. His tone was commanding. I could feel my muscles start to tense up. That's all lost. A surge of justified anger took hold of me. How ridiculous it is to let your parents dictate what you wear. All of that is gone. And before I was able to realize the effect of that response, my dad's loud voice reverberated around the room. That's gone. The author was trying to show you how to hear what was being said and what the context was. If it was a play, we'd be able to see the actors on the stage saying those words within a setting. But because it's prose, we need to provide all of that. Let's reverse it. Listen to this. This is just dialogue. What happened? What's wrong? I had a panic attack at work. I tried to call you, but you weren't home. So Sherry gave me a ride. It's okay, sweetie. It's okay. Sniff. Arg. What? What is it, John? Nothing. My stomach just hurts. I'll be fine. What do you picture is happening here? How is any of this being said? Again, an actor, if we were going to watch them on stage, would give you some hint of how all of this is being said. But you can't assume the reader is going to be able to hear it just by the words alone. And if you're not okay with having something be ambivalent, then you have to steer the reader in the right direction. Let's look at these words on screen. Now we can see who's speaking when. We still don't know who the person is or where they are or what's happening, but we at least can see that by the way the dialogue is broken up, that it's at least one person and another person going back and forth. What we're going to do now is look at this dialogue with the equivalent of emojis. This again is from a section of John Porcellino's memoir, The Hospital Suite, where he describes his struggle with a long illness. Now we have the benefit of having the equivalent of actors reading this. We can actually see what's happening. The dialogue can go only so far, and John Porcellino has an advantage over the average writer. He can literally draw the scene for us. And drawing the scene is what all of us memoirists and personal essayists need to do. In our next lecture, we're going to see how to do that through prose. We're going to look at dialogue in prose. Listen to this. Hey, new plans. We're going to roll this kid's house. No more bowling. Want to come? Who's going? Steve, Dan, Liz, everyone. So you want to go? You do? You drive and I'll ride with you? Okay. We're meeting at Walmart. You know where Walmart is? If I was to give you that scene, what would you say was happening? Would you know who was speaking, how they were speaking, what was being meant by what they were saying? Would you say that this was a very compelling scene, that you could hear how it would have played out? Do you want to even keep reading it? Let's look at it on screen with how it's written. We know based on punctuation clues where one person speaks and where another person picks up. We don't yet know who's speaking when. We don't know if it's a woman, a man, 2 people, 6 people. We could infer. And if this were a screenplay, it might read like this. Person 1, person 2. Okay, so now we know that it's 2 people that are in conversation, but what else can we tell? Are we able to hear this in our heads? Where are they? Let's put it back into prose. Hey, new plans, she said. We're going to roll this kid's house. No more bowling. Want to come? Who's going? He asked. Steve, Dan, Liz, everyone, she said. So you want to go? You do? You drive and I'll ride with you? Okay, he said. We're meeting at Walmart, she said. You know where Walmart is? He said, she said. We're helping the reader to know gender, who's speaking, when they're speaking, but has the scene become any more dynamic? Can you hear it any better? We know it's a male and a female conversing, but beyond that, we know very little. We're going to look at the original by Tao Lin from his short story, Suburban Teenage Wasteland Blues. And remember, just because it's a short story in fiction doesn't mean that the rules don't apply to memoir and personal essay. Click on the link under the video and read the passage. All right, we've got a lot more information now. Let's look at everything that was lost if Tao Lin had just relied on dialogue alone. The setting of the scene is gone. The next evening, Greg drove to the bowling alley and sat in his car. That's going to be gone. The fact that Rachel knocked on his window is gone. We still have, hey, new plans, she said. But then the whole next paragraph would be gone. That's where we talk about what's going on inside of Greg. His heart leapt a bit, left a balloonish impression in his throat. All of that would be gone. The memory he has of his mother, that's gone. Who's going? Greg said. That remains. Steve, Dan, Liz, everyone, that remains too. But the fact that Rachel was smiling is gone, that she leaned her forearms on Greg's door, that's going to be gone. That she smelled good, that Greg noticed that she was pretty. All of that's gone. So you want to go, Rachel said? That dialogue remains. But now we have the action, that's going to be lost. The fact that her head was now entirely in the car and how Greg wanted to kiss her. All of that's gone. Okay, Greg said. And then the line, we're meeting at Walmart, she said. You know where Walmart is. All of that narrative, all of the inner life, the psychology, the context, the car, the memory, if we're just relying on dialogue, we're going to lose everything that we could be giving to the reader. I want to show you how I did it in my own memoir. And this is from a scene when I was about 27 and I ran into my father one day in New York after I had seen a movie about Che Guevara. Sitsky, my father called out, using his invented Russified diminutive of my name, which has never failed to endear him to me. Pop, I said. How was the movie, Sitsky? I liked it, I said. And my girlfriend, who cared little for politics and had never even heard of Che Guevara before I had told her about him, said, I liked it too. I see, my father said, looking first at my girlfriend and then at me. It was obvious by the expression on his face that we had given the wrong answer. I thought of backtracking and adding qualifications to my opinion, but before I could think what those qualifications could be, he said, let's have dinner tonight. What do you say? There's a nice restaurant right around the corner. I agreed, of course, wholeheartedly. And if I were to strip away everything and just leave the dialogue, this is what we would be left with. Sitsky, Pop, how was the movie, Sitsky? I liked it. I liked it too. I see. Let's have dinner tonight. What do you say? There's a nice restaurant right around the corner. We're going to finish this course up with a continuation of my discussion with Amy Bloom, and we're going to talk about how do you know if what you're writing is any good? That's the lifelong question of any writer. So stick around. Hi, everybody. We're back with Amy Bloom for our final interview. Hi, Amy.
Hello. Nice
Welcome
to be here
back.
again. Thank you.
So I have some questions about just writing, how we
Okay.
write.
Okay.
And I'm going to start off with this. How do you know when what you've written is any good?
Oh, well, most of the time, I think it's not very good. I do read it out loud every couple of days. I do about 30 full revisions of whatever it is, which can be, a novel or an essay. It's nicer when it's just an essay because those 30 revisions do take a lot of time.
Well, let me ask. You say you usually don't like what you've written. And yet, here we have, if you notice, all of this. So something must be working. So do you write, you said in every few days, you read it aloud. What's going on when you read it aloud?
I think you can't hide when you read it out loud. I don't read it to sell it to myself. I don't give it a great, plummy, romantic reading in which, every word is underlined beautifully. I read it like I'm reading the telephone book, so I can just hear the words. But I think you can hear the rhythm or the lack of it. You can hear what jars. You can hear what's self-conscious. You can hear what is me as a writer trying to shove a writerly remark into the sentence where it doesn't belong. You can hear what's unnecessary. You can hear what's repetitive. And you can hear what's awkward. So if I don't want to read it out loud, it's because I know there's something wrong. So I always force myself to read it out loud. When I say I don't like what I've written, I don't mean that I look at every sentence and go, ugh, that's so terrible, although that certainly happens sometimes. What I mean is that I'm not trying to persuade myself that it's great. I'm just trying to get the sentences down in the first pass and then work on making them everything that they can be. But my goal in writing the first draft is not to delight myself. My goal in writing the first draft is to create something that I can make better.
You have to have a very sort of cold, calculating, distant view of your own writing, of the thing that you're producing. You have to come at it with that as if you're reading it as a stranger might. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, I mean it's not an act of self-care or self-love. I mean, my job is not to read the sentences and go, "Oh, Amy,
right,
you are fantastic." My job is to read the sentences and go, "What is this like for someone who doesn't know me at all? What is this like for someone who can't hear my voice? They can only read it on the page." Graham Greene says, a writer is somebody with a splinter of ice in his or her heart. And I think he meant that in terms of observation of other human beings, but I think it's also true in terms of looking at your work. Your goal is not to persuade yourself that it's great. Your goal is to see how you can make it better and how in that moment, in this period of time, this is the best work you can do, not to persuade yourself that it's good enough.
When you find something that's not working in this out loud reading?
Every day.
Too many times.
Every day something
Right.
that's not working.
How do you know how to change it? I guess what I'm asking is, it's possible to pinpoint, oh, I see that's a problem, but how to fix the problem, does that take its own set of tools?
Sure, it does. I mean, sometimes it's simple. Sometimes you've hung the picture on the wall and it's crooked and you go, oh, I just need to do that. And that's all it is. You've written the word lime and you recognize, that's a little fancy. What's wrong with green? That's a wonderful, simple fix. And it's not necessarily going to be like a set of dominoes, which I often find, I fix this sentence, then I have to fix the paragraph, then I have to fix the page,
Right.
and before you know it, I'm fixing the whole darn thing. But a simple fix is wonderful. It's just a word, and it's not a word with a lot of chemistry. It's not a word with a lot of charge to it. But sometimes I read the sentence and I think, oh, it's so self-conscious. It's so self-aware. Can I take it down a little bit? Would it be better if it was in the third person? Would it be better if it was in the past tense? Is it better in the first person and in the present tense? Is that how I want to do it? If it's a personal essay, it's probably going to be in the first person, but you still get to choose your tense, Am I using the conditional too much? Am I saying, I would do this, I would do that, I should have done that? Is there a lot of repetition? And if there is, why is that happening? What is it? Have I taken my eye off the ball instead of it really being about this moment between me and my father? Have I sort of lost track of it? Or was it really that the important thing was the wedding and this moment with my father is an offshoot of that tree, but now it seems to dominate. So then you have a decision. Is it that the moment with the father is really much more important than the wedding, and that's where I want to put my energy? Or do I need to trim it back a little bit so it comes back around to the center of the story?
So does all of this ability come with practice?
I hope so.
Right.
I feel like that's what I'm counting on.
Right.
I'm counting on, you get up and you do it, and you get up and you do it, and you get up and you do it. Sometimes I feel like being a writer is like being a subsistence farmer. You're going to plant, you're going to weed, you're going to water, and half the time the crops are going to fail anyway, but that's still the job.
Well, then that's a good segue, because what kind of writing schedule do you have? Do you just wait until you feel really excited about a project and inspired, and then you sit down and start working on it? Or
That's hilarious.
that was a softball. I was setting you up.
That was
You
a
like
softball.
that, right?
Yes, I would love to have that
Sure.
career and be that writer and have that happen more than once every 10 years. I think it's Philip Pullman who said, I absolutely wait for inspiration to strike, and that's why I'm at my desk every morning at 9 a.m.
That's right.
waiting for inspiration
That's
to
right.
strike. No, that's the job. And I think it's not just the job if you are a full-time writer, but I think whatever your schedule and your possibility as a writer, you owe it to yourself to take the work seriously. No one else cares. Nobody else in this wide world is rooting for you and your work, really, except you. And so you owe it to the story, you owe it to the essay, you owe it to the memoir to put in the effort, to put in the time, not to hedge, not to hold back, not to say to yourself, it could have been really great if only I had given it more time. You owe it the time because it's work that matters to you, and it is your voice in the world, and nothing else is like that, and it deserves your attention.
That's a great way to end. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back with just some final closing words. All right, we've talked a lot. Dialogue, openings, fiction, how to convey something to the reader. This is all food for thought. Go away now, work on your own stuff. Use what was helpful. Remember, this is all a process. It's a lot of trial and error. It's what's working, what's not working. When you get other eyes on your stories, you'll see how readers are responding to it. This course isn't in a vacuum. There are other courses in the specialization of memoir and personal essay, and I encourage you to watch those. And also, there's the creative writing specialization that I encourage you to watch. So good luck, and above all, keep writing.